to be? What are you called to be? Have you thought about that? Does that sound a little too spiritual for you? A little too woo-woo, maybe? You have been called to be many things in this life. Thank you, Yes to Love. I don't know if you recognize this. I didn't until I actually looked at the words of this song, but there was a progression there from what I am called to be. I'm called to be a healer for all humanity. Can you relate to that? Do you have your job to be called to be a healer for humanity? I'm called to be a dreamer, believe in what I can be. Now, you might have a lot of different things, but let me tell you, you are called to be a dreamer, to be all that you can be. I want you to embrace your dreams and be that dreamer. I'm called to be a giver. Abundance I receive. Look at the abundance of the universe. It's there for you. Recognize it, take it, and use it for your good and the good of others. The second verse, they went on to say, you are called. You're called to be a mother, to nurture family. Now, some of you men probably don't relate to that as much. But you know, even men have the female side of them that we don't want to ever admit. That nurturing side. And so we're there to nurture and provide for our families. You're called to be a brother. So the females here may not relate to this side. But you're called to be a brother, be strength in time of need. Haven't you had people in your life that needed you, that needed your strength? It didn't matter if you were male or female, did it? They needed somebody to be there, and you were the one that was there. You showed up as God at that time. You're called to be a neighbor, see a friend in all you need, meet in all you meet. And the last verse was we. We are called to be kindness, set the brokenhearted free. So we're here to give hope to one another. We're called to be forgiveness where pain has run too deep. We can forgive. We're called to be compassion, the wind beneath each wing. So we can lift people up. We can be that wind beneath their wings. We can help people live a better life. And it starts with us. It starts with inside of us because life is always lived from the inside out. And so as we encourage ourselves, as we find ourselves, then we can help others. Our title today is The Highest and Best is Your Personal Self. So we want to look at what that means. What is your highest and best? I will tell you, switch to the end, the highest and best is where you and God are one. Where you and Spirit recognize that alignment with each other. Now, Spirit recognizes it all the time. It's just waiting for us to recognize it. So, my question for you, where did you come from? Where did you come from? Many of you will probably say, well, my parents. And there's an answer. Some of you might say from Kansas. Some of you might say from Indiana. Some of you might say I came from Germany or Italy. We know that God is all there is. God is everywhere. There's not a spot that God is not. God is present all around the world, all throughout the ethers of the universe. So I would postulate to you that you came from God. You came from God. And when you recognize that, you can be open to a much different life. Bob last week read the different statements of what we believe. One of those statements said, we believe in the incarnation of Spirit in us, and that all people are incarnations of the one Spirit. To me, that says we all came from God. We were all created in the likeness and image of God, of Spirit. Whatever name you want to put to that divine being or presence. So if we all came from Spirit, then God, Spirit, is our nature. God's nature is our nature. And what do we know about the nature of God? Well, in case you've forgotten, let me tell you. Or remind you. God's nature is life-giving. God's nature is love. God's nature is peace. It's clarity. It's abundance. It's freedom. That's God's nature. And that is our nature because we're made in the likeness and image of God. Now, do some of us block that nature from coming through? Well, I've seen that happen in some people. We forget that we are made in the same nature as God. We're made from God's stuff. So what could we be other than God's nature? We have a choice. The difference here is that we have a choice in whether we recognize that in our life or not. And that's a huge choice for us to get to, for us to realize. In The Science of Mind on page 25, Ernest says, the divine plan is one of freedom. Bondage is not God ordained. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul. All instinctively feel this. The truth points to freedom under law. Thus, the inherent nature of man is forever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom. We all do well to listen to this inner voice, for it tells us of a life wonderful in its scope, a love beyond our fondest dreams, and a freedom which the soul craves. So Ernest is telling us here that we are free, that God created us free, and God created us that we might have the life of our dreams, love beyond measure here, that we might have freedom, being free indeed. The truth shall set you free. Have you heard that phrase? That truth means remembering who you are. If you're made of God's stuff, if you're made in the likeness and image of God, if you recognize this, if you align yourself with this, then you can be free because God is not limiting you. You're the only one that can limit yourself. Now, there was a time when I probably would have argued with that statement and said, no, my parents limit me. But then, am I not blaming somebody else and giving away my power to someone else? Because we're each responsible for ourselves. Yes, as my student said, this is the church of perpetual responsibility. We have to be responsible for ourselves, for our own thinking here. And as we take responsibility for ourselves, we can't blame our parents. We can't blame the teachers at school. We can't blame the minister. Because we're each responsible for ourselves, for knowing what is our truth, what is going to set us free. And it's recognizing that bondage is not God ordained. God wants us to have a wonderful life. to have love beyond our fondest dreams, and to be free. Think about this. In terms of plants, it's an easy way for me to talk about. Plants, when we plant a plant or a seed, we plant it into the soil. In Science of Mind, we talk about spirit law being our creative soil, the creative medium that we put our thoughts into to create our lives. So when I say you're responsible for your life, it's what you're thinking. Those are the seeds that are going to create what's going to show up in your life. If you think you can, you will. If you think you can't, you won't. So you're always right. Yes, you're right. So think about plants here and how plants grow. I love this. Before a plant grows up, it grows down. A plant has to put its roots into the soil to be fed, to collect nutrients, to have the strength to rise up, to grow up. And that's what we do as we align ourselves with the Spirit, is we put our roots, our spiritual roots, down into Spirit. We connect with God. We have our spiritual practices, whether that's prayer, meditation, spiritual reading, singing, speaking spiritual things with other people, whatever it is that helps you connect with Spirit. Those spiritual practices are important for you to grow your roots down deep into the soil of God. And soil can become depleted when you grow the same crop over and over and don't use some kind of nutrient to enrich the soil. It can become depleted. Newsflash, God can never become depleted. God is unlimited. And if God's unlimited, then we can always go into the soil of God. We can always let our roots take strength, gather information, know truth for ourselves, and in that we grow and we can be the spiritual beings that we are called to be. We have strength to live the life that we're called when we first center ourselves in Spirit, in God. God is inexhaustible. Here's another thought here from 365 Days of Richer Living. It's a meditation book Ernest Holmes and Raymond Charles Barker wrote. In there it says, the intelligence that governs the planets in their course, big thing here, is the same wisdom that's in the anthill or the beehive. You see, God knows no size. It doesn't matter whether it is orchestrating a universe, a balloon falling from the sky, it's Spirit dropping in. Spirit comes from within, but it's also without. So Spirit knows no size. If it's the universe that it's orchestrating, or if it's the anthill or the beehive, it doesn't matter. It's that same wisdom that's in the bird that flies north in the summer and south in the winter and knows where to find its food. It's an intuitive and instinctive knowing. But that which is blind or instinctive knowing in the animal should become conscious knowing and the will in the human. So we are a little different from the animals, right? In the animal kingdom, it works such as a blind force. But in the human kingdom, it works through blind force only in the automatic reactions of nature, such as involuntary functions of the body. So I spelled this out for you just so you would think about this a little bit. But breathing, we don't voluntarily have to think to breathe, do we? Our heartbeat. We don't tell our heart to beat all the time, do we? We may tell our hearts to slow down sometimes. And physical growth. We don't tell our bones to start growing or keep growing. Some of you might want to grow more or to stop growing. But these are involuntary functions that go on. It's Spirit doing this for us. Now, on top of that involuntary function, because we're humans, he says, but the more personal use of it being whether or not we shall call upon the one mind and Spirit to direct and govern our affairs, this depends on our personal choice. So we do have choice here. This is what freedom and individuality mean. So what they're talking about here is really that our freedom is freedom of choice. We can choose to look at ourselves as spiritual beings, to allow ourselves to grow deep into the soil of God, to pick up what Spirit has for us, to recognize that our nature is the nature of Spirit. And so we are unlimited. That's the nature of Spirit. We are creative because that's the nature of Spirit. We are abundant because that's the nature of Spirit. There's so much that Spirit is. And guess what? We are too, if we recognize that and make the choice to allow that to come into our lives. But it's our choice. We can just as easily choose to say that's all hoodoo. And I know what is really truth. Really truth is, if I work hard, if I get a good education, I'll have a good job, I'll have a good life. And so then the person becomes the workaholic. I've been there. The person becomes the workaholic. And then what? They collect things. They have the nice house. They have the nice cars. They have the beautiful wife. And then life falls apart. It's a choice. So when we don't keep ourselves rooted in Spirit, sometimes we go off making choices because we have free will. We can do that. And then life might just crumble. When we keep ourselves rooted in God, life is not going to crumble. There will be good all of the time. Regardless of what the outside looks like, you will know the truth and you will know that Spirit is there. Spirit is your source. Spirit is your guide. How do you want to show up in life? Let me share this story with you. Tess was an 8-year-old girl. Tess heard her mom and dad talking about her brother Andrew. She knew that he was very sick and that they were completely out of money. They were moving to an apartment complex next month because Daddy couldn't afford both the house payment and the medical bills for her brother. No one would loan them the money. She heard her dad say to her mom, "Only a miracle can save him now." Tess went to her bedroom. She pulled out a glass jelly jar and twisted off the lid. She poured out the change that she had in the jar, and she counted it, not once, not twice, 3 times. There was no room for error here. She had to have this exactly right. She counted the money and counted the money. She put it back in the jar, twisted on the lid, and snuck out the back door. She made it 6 blocks down the road to the Rexall drugstore. She went in to talk to the pharmacist. The pharmacist, who was there talking to another man, had no time for this 8-year-old girl. She stood and waited patiently, but he gave her no attention. So Tess started scuffing her feet on the floor to make some noise. He didn't respond. She cleared her throat with the most disgusting sound she could make. Nothing. Finally, she opened her jar, took out a quarter, and started tapping it on the glass countertop. That did it. The pharmacist came running over and said, "What do you want?" he asked in an annoyed tone of voice. "I'm talking to my brother from Chicago, who I haven't seen in ages," he answered without even giving her a chance. "Well, I want to talk to you about my brother," said Tess in the same annoyed tone. "He's really, really sick, and I want to buy a miracle." "I beg your pardon?" "His name is Andrew. He has something bad growing inside his head, and my daddy says the only thing that can save him now is a miracle. So, how much does it cost? I want to buy a miracle." "Well, we don't sell miracles here," the pharmacist said. His voice softened just a little. "Listen," said Tess, "I have the money to pay for it, and if it isn't enough, I'll go get some more money. Just tell me how much it is. I want to buy a miracle." The pharmacist's brother, at this point, had come over. He bent down to Tess and he said, "What kind of miracle does your brother need?" Tess replied, "I don't know." Her eyes started to well with tears. "I just know that he's really sick and Mommy says he needs an operation, but Daddy can't pay for it. So I want to use my money." "How much do you have?" the pharmacist's brother asked. $1.11. "It's all the money I have, but I can go get some more if I need it. Just tell me how much money I need." The pharmacist said, with a smile, $1.11. The exact price of a miracle for a little brother. Now take me to where your brother is. I want to meet him and see if I might have the kind of miracle he needs. The pharmacist's brother happened to be Dr. Carlton Armstrong, who was a surgeon in Chicago and specialized in neurosurgery. The operation was completed without charge. And it wasn't long until Andrew was back home again, doing well. Later, Mom and Dad were talking about this chain of events that led up to this operation. Her mom said, "That surgery was a miracle. I wonder how much it would have cost." Tess just smiled because she knew the cost of a miracle, $1.11. Spirit's calling. When you go within yourself, what do you find? Do you find the compassion of this little 8-year-old girl? Or do you find something else? Something other than compassion and love? It's our choice. Spirit within us, when our roots go deep into spirit, would be growing compassion, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be what we would expect and know would be there? Because that's what God has for us. In Living the Science of Mind, Ernest says, "The life within you is God. Whatever is true of God is true of your life, since your life and the life of God are not two, but one." He goes on to talk about how the God outside of us is much different than seeing God within us. We know, and one of our statements of belief is that the outer God, the God in heaven, and the God within is one God. There's not two different gods. There's not two powers. There's only one. It's all God. It's all available for us. And we get to choose how much we will allow God to show up in our lives, by how we get rooted in the divine, by how we take nourishment from God and bring that nourishment to this world through what we grow in our lives. My last point is that there are two different ways we can look at power. Have you heard the phrase, "more power to you"? More power to you. What are you wishing? You might be wishing worldly power, or you might be wishing inner power. The difference, Worldly power here is when we want to wish somebody, or for ourselves, wish to have control over other people, over situations, to put our will on someone else. That's the controlling power here. It's much different from inner power. Inner power is where we connect with Spirit, where we connect with the divine, and we allow that God within us to nurture us so that our power comes from our own strength of being rooted in God. That's our theme for the month, is being rooted in the divine. So as we take root as spiritual beings, we are able to grow into the beautiful flowers, into the beautiful plants that we are, expressing life in its fullness. I hope that you'll take some time to do your spiritual practice this week, to allow yourself to be nourished by Spirit, so that you are clear and in clear alignment with God, so you know how you want to show up in the world with the inner power that comes from connecting with Spirit. As spiritual beings, that's what we strive for, and that's what I know for you this week. Great power as you connect with God. Let us pray. Thank you, Spirit. Thank you for this day and this time to come together to remember who it is we are, that we are creations of the divine, that God is our strength, that the Spirit within us is the Spirit of love, of peace, of abundance, of freedom. And we have a choice, and we make that choice right here and right now, to be one with God, to recognize our unity and the strength that that gives us to be all that we can be. We choose to show up as life, as hope, as strength, as freedom in this life, and to share that same power with all those we meet. Our highest and best is our personal self, and our personal self is powered and fueled by the nourishment of Spirit. I'm grateful for the truth of these words. I release them into the universe that I know always says yes. And together we say,